On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to take a look at the Bible's discussion of economics. Satan is a socialist. Yes, he is. And Gary Stimman has written an article about this for our April 2009 edition of Prophecy in the News magazine. And he's here to discuss the problems that our world faces today and the development of socialism on a grand scale.
JR, the conversation today is money and economics. Buying, selling, investing, employment, saving. All of the things that happen in the world of money are a factor of great concern now. And that's because money has really taken on the wrong proportion. That is to say, there's a place for money and for economics, according to the Bible, but then there's a place where money goes that you should not follow. Well, that's going to be our subject today, economics, and in particular, the idea of socialism. The term economy comes right out of the Bible, comes from a Greek word in the New Testament, oikonomia, which means stewardship or management of the household. And the Bible has a lot to say about stewardship. In fact, Jesus and the apostles all spoke about, if you will, the economy. JR, we're going to talk about the economy from a biblical perspective.
According to your article here, what got us where we are today, you said quite simply, greed, corruption, and incompetence. Honesty and ethics were thrown overboard for the greenback. Well, let us be reminded what Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or a biblical word for money.
Money. Money makes the world go around. It's not love that makes the world go around. Just ask anybody. Jesus, and we're going to see this with great clarity, he knew instinctively that viewing money as a remedy for the ills of mankind is simply wrong. If you think of money in this way, that is, if you think of it as the cure, then it begins to be a god to you. You begin to think of ways of redistributing the wealth. You begin to think of money bringing health care, money bringing blessing, money bringing all the things that you pray for. And money soon becomes a god. And Jesus was foursquare against that idea.
You know, Gary, this idea of money solving all of our problems, whether we earn it or not, is really the underlying basic problem that besets our world today. Something for nothing, for example. Jesus was an economist, and he intended for men to earn their living. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about, for example, the unjust steward in Luke chapter 16.
Luke chapter 16, JR. This is an interesting parable. Jesus told it, I think, because business is a big thing. It was big in Jesus' day. It's always been a big thing on planet Earth. Making money, making profit. And in Luke 16, he's talking about a rich man. Verse 1, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him, said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. In other words, he was called on the carpet for actually doing bad business, misusing the company profits, if you will.
It seems that he had sold products on credit.
Yes.
To some people who couldn't pay. Doesn't that sound familiar
It
today?
does sound familiar.
So he went to one man, the man who was least able to pay, and he said, well, tell us the story, Gary.
Well, he called he called all the people who basically owed on credit into the office. And he says to the first, how much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. By the way, that's a lot of oil, 600 gallons of oil approximately. And he said unto him, take thy bill, sit down quickly and write 50. So what was he doing?
So here was a man who couldn't pay.
Right.
And so he said, if you can pay me today, we'll settle for half.
Settle for half.
Well, that actually turned out to be a good deal for the man who couldn't pay and for the business. So it was a win-win situation.
In other words, what they needed was liquid cash.
Yeah.
Do we hear this today or not?
Cash flow. Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, look at all those mortgages that the folks who bought houses couldn't pay.
Oh,
Their
yeah.
interest rates went up. And so something has to be done to save the day. Otherwise, everybody's going to lose.
So he says to another, verse 7, how much owest thou? He said, 100 measures of wheat. By the way, that's quite a few bushels of wheat, somewhere around 60, 70 bushels of wheat. And he said unto him, take thy bill and write fourscore. That's 80. In other words, you're going to get off, instead of 100, 80. And if you do it today, you can take it for 80. And JR got liquid cash.
The man had more ability to pay, and this guy knew it. He sized up his customers. This one's on credit, but he has a little more than the other, and so he made a deal for 80%. And it was, again, a win-win situation. Now,
as Jesus tells this parable here in verse 8, he says, and the Lord commended the unjust steward. This is the boss. Jesus calls him the Lord. Commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. This is Jesus' view of money, which he calls the mammon of unrighteousness. Nevertheless, you need to learn how to use it. Wow.
Now, to bring it up to date, General Motors, you know, has had problems, and Chrysler's having problems going into bankruptcy. And they've told the banks that they owe billions to, you're going to have to settle for 25 cents on the dollar. Well, that doesn't set too well with them, but in the final analysis, that's what they're going to have to take. And that at least gets the bad debt off of their books, and the government comes in and slips them taxpayer money to beef it up. So 27 cents on the dollar really turns out not to be so bad for them, and everybody's happy.
JR, among the Jews, there's an old saying, and I'm sure it's a very, very old saying, business is business. And that separates it from things of the spirit. It's not spiritual, it's business. And the boss of this unjust steward really approved of what the steward did, because this is business. In other words, the steward was doing exactly what the boss probably had done many, many times before. And the boss recognized a man who was capable of doing business. And Jesus then comments on this, and he says, worldly people are wiser in the way that they handle money than you are in the way you handle the things of the Spirit. In and of itself, money is not evil. It's the way you look at it and the way you handle it. And this brings us then to the heart of the discussion about how should we think of money? How should we think of economics?
Yeah. You know, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, the Bible says, they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and unto many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. So looking back at this fellow who couldn't collect 100%, if he stood his ground and said, you owe me, you're going to pay me, the guy would have gone bankrupt, couldn't pay, everybody would lose. So he took what he could and moved on. And that's what we're going to have to do, I guess, in America today. But the truth of the matter is, when you boil it right down to it, the United States is so far in debt, and we have reached that point where the rest of the world says, let's move away from the U.S. dollar and establish a one world currency. Well, Gary, this moves us into socialism, doesn't it?
It does. And when the Bible says, for the love of money is the root of all evil, what it really means is, if you love money as the purveyor of fairness and of health and of blessing and of fortune, you love it too much. You should love God that way, not money. And at the present historical moment, the entire world is an exhibit of this singular fundamental truth. The love of money has sort of driven the world into an insane pursuit, a merry-go-round of finances, electronic funds transfers, gimmicks, gadgets, new products, new forms of entertainment, ways of getting the cash to flow, and the 24/7 video presentations, you know, MSNBC, everybody telling you what to do with your money. And panicked world leaders are now calling for a global government, which, by the way, was prophesied in the Bible. Ministers of the U.S. and the U.K. and Russia and France and Germany are all saying the only way to reestablish fairness is to create a global currency, a one-world financial system that will ensure fairness for everybody. Well, I guess you know where that's going to lead.
Absolutely. And listen, you need to get this article and read it. Satan is a socialist. We're going to be getting into this socialism here in just a moment. But first, I want you to call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and get the April edition of Prophecy in the News magazine and read this article for yourself and all the other articles that we have in the magazine. It will be a help to you. And by the way, while you're calling, you may want to subscribe to the next 12 issues. I hope you will. If you will, I want to make you a special offer. We have 4 books that we've published over the years that we would like to offer you. This one is entitled Hidden Prophecies in the Song of Moses. This one, They Pierced the Veil and Saw the Future. Another one, The Mystery of the Menorah and the Hebrew Alphabet. And finally, Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Plan to Rule the World. This one world monetary system, all spelled out in this book. Listen, you can get these 4 books, a $48 value, absolutely free if you will subscribe to Prophecy in the News for the next 12 months. And let us keep you up to date with what's going on around the world as the world moves towards socialism and the eventual mark of the beast, a one-world government and a one-world monetary system. So call today, will you, and get these free books. By the way, if you already have the books, if you want something else, we have 4 discs here, 3 DVDs, lectures that I have presented before live audiences, and then a disc here on last year's magazines in PDF format. This program is called The Legend of the Holy Grail. This one, Birth Defects. This one, Job, the oldest prophecy in the Bible. These can be yours if you would prefer them over the books. So when you call, ask the operator, tell the operator whether you want the books or the DVDs, okay? Call today. Gary?
Well, JR, we're going to talk now about that global financial system, and then we're going to talk about how socialism plays into this theme. The prophet Ezekiel talked about the prince of Tyrus. Tyrus was Tyre of the ancient world. It was the Phoenician traders who had their base in what is today's Lebanon, at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, and JR, they had a fleet of ships that went all over the civilized world, plied the 7 seas, picking up trade goods, depositing them in one port after another. They went everywhere in the world. There was no place they didn't go. And they established a global trading system. In fact, the idea of credit goes back to the Phoenician traders. And upon credit, on a global basis, is founded the idea of the market, the global market. Ezekiel chapter 27 talks about this global market. It talks about the rise of it, and it talks about falling into ruin. Ezekiel 27:27 says, Thy riches, thy fares, thy merchandise, the occupiers of thy merchandise, all thy men of war that are in thee, and all thy company which is in the midst of thee shall fall in the midst of the seas in the days of thy ruin. Ezekiel shows how the global traders developed a one-world system, and how in the end they would all be judged and fall into the sea. JR, that's the book of Revelation.
Absolutely. So what started in Phoenicia, and you know, you go back to Laban, after whom Lebanon was named.
Yeah.
He was a businessman.
Oh, yes.
You remember him and Jacob? It's just amazing. And, of course, every time he'd make a deal with Jacob, Jacob would end up the winner, you know?
That's true.
And so eventually, I guess, his clan moved over to Lebanon. They became Phoenician traders. They sailed the seven seas, and they've established actually the merchants of Tarshish own the world today, basically.
And as you get into the next chapter in Ezekiel, Ezekiel 28, the prince of Tyrus becomes the king of Tyrus, Satan himself. And thus we see that the real power in the global trading system is Satan. And that brings us now to our subject, socialism. JR, socialism is what the world loves. And you can go all the way back 2,500 years ago to the writings of Plato. He wrote The Republic, and I think everybody's heard of it if they haven't read it. But The Republic is Plato's idea of the perfect society. But it's secular society. It's not society run on any godly principle. It's run on philosophical principles, as you might imagine.
Pure socialism.
Pure socialism, devoid of any knowledge of God. Men devise schemes for utopian socialism. And in The Republic, Plato proposes ways to bring what he calls justice, but he does use the word fairness to society. Does that word sound familiar? Bringing fairness to society?
Indeed. He must have been a progressive.
He must have been. Now, Plato saw cities as being founded to bring social, political, and educational order. He envisioned a society being led by philosophically superior men and women residing in communistic residences, which he called guardhouses. That is, they were guardians over society to make sure that nothing went amiss. They enforced the social order, which they used to regulate. They regulated it in order to bring the best to mankind. In other words, their job was to keep social order and make sure everybody gets an equal share of the community property. Well, that's Plato's idea of paradise, J.R.
That's communism.
It's communism.
2,500 years ago, communism.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Now, this is the dream of man. Powerful men that have this dream of rising to control society so that they can take power and redistribute all of the wealth so that everybody gets a fair share. It's a religion. Socialism is a religion. And now we get to the idea that Satan is a socialist.
Yeah.
Jesus had a socialist among his own disciples. And that socialist was Judas Iscariot. And J.R., I don't think most people think about Judas as being a socialist.
Yeah.
But he was.
Yeah. So in the week that Jesus was soon to die, he went to Bethany, just on the east of Jerusalem, on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives. There was a supper held in his honor. Lazarus was there, and Mary came in with an alabaster box of ointment, very costly, to anoint Jesus. Tell us about that.
Well, we all have heard the story about Jesus being anointed with this, actually it was a salve brought from India. This is where spikenard came from. Very rare. It was in an alabaster box which had been hermetically sealed in India so that it wouldn't lose any of its aroma. Very valuable. In other words, as we shall learn, it was worth about a year's wages. And this woman, in an act of absolute adoration and respect and worship for Jesus, opened the seal. The Bible says broke the box, but actually she broke the seal on the box and began to apply this ointment to Jesus, filled the whole house with the aroma of ointment. And here, according to Mark, is what happened. There were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. So the reaction in the room was, wow, what a waste of money. This should have been used for the poor. Well, Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me, for ye have the poor with you always. And whensoever you will, you may do them good, but me you have not always. He's beginning a little financial object lesson here about the use of money. Mm-hmm. Basically, what he said in a word is that you cannot cure the ills of society by the application of money.
Or socialism.
Or socialism.
Basically, we could sell this and give it to the poor. That's socialism.
Right.
Give it to the poor means that the poor get something for nothing, basically. Now, don't misunderstand me. I think we should help the poor.
Sure.
We should feed the hungry, clothe the naked, help those who cannot help themselves, but those who can help themselves should.
Now, Jesus actually said something much deeper than we might think. Looking at John's account of this same narrative, then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Now, 300 pence would be 300 denarii, about a year's wages. Mm-hmm. This, adds John, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag. In other words, he was the treasurer, and he bare what was put therein. Judas was very, let's call him the chancellor of the exchequer. He was the treasurer. Mm-hmm. He, I think, took a very vital interest in the treasure. He wanted to keep it. He thought of himself as the one who could keep it. And yes, this paints a picture of Judas that's not often painted. He, I think, foresaw himself as the secretary of the treasury in the new coming kingdom with Jesus on the throne of David. He envisioned himself in royal robes, handling all of the money of the kingdom. We're talking millions, billions, and he visualized himself as that kind of a world leader.
But Gary, here he gives himself away.
He does.
He is a socialist. What he had to say is exactly what we're hearing out of the mouths of politicians today.
Exactly.
And so he reveals his inner self here, as he says. We should have sold this and given it to the poor. But basically, John, was one of those sons of thunder.
Yes, he was.
he couldn't contain himself. He just tells it like it is. He was a thief. That's what he says.
A
thief.
Was a
thief.
Now, I think the heart of a thief resides in many of the very, very upper crust money moguls of the world today. We've seen some exposed. I think of Bernie Madoff. There was the heart of a thief if ever there was one. Mm-hmm. And yet he posed as someone who was a benefactor. JR, many people in great social positions pose as benefactors. They pose as men of philanthropy, mm-hmm, and men who would better society, and they come up with all kinds of schemes to redistribute the wealth. But JR, the poor suffer.
Yeah.
The poor never come out on top.
So, in the lamentation about Tyre, mm-hmm, the king of Tyre turns out to be the antitype or the prototype of Satan himself. And Judas Iscariot here is called the son of perdition. And
exactly,
as such, he is a prototype of the Antichrist.
He is.
The son of Satan.
So, quite simply, to review, Judas is the perfect illustration of socialism in action. Secretly, he saw himself as the administrator of the great wealth of the coming kingdom. He saw nothing wrong with feathering his own nest with funds that might have been intended for Jesus' public ministry. After all, wasn't he one of the big guys walking right along with Jesus? Mm-hmm. I'm sure he justified this in his own mind.
Yeah.
And his excuse was, we're going to help the poor. That is, we shall just redistribute the wealth. Judas was not only a socialist, he was the son of perdition, and J.R., another son of perdition is coming,
Yes.
and he'll have the same idea.
So let's talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and that third horseman in particular.
Well, I think everybody has read about those four horsemen of the apocalypse. We have the red horse of war, you know.
Yeah.
Wow. And we have the black horse, and we have the white horse. And well, I'll tell you what, white horse comes out first. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. The Antichrist is commonly thought of as riding forth conquering to conquer. The red horse follows. The black horse of economic disruption follows that, followed by pestilence. But right in the middle of those horsemen is the corruption of wealth. And the man who comes along with a solution to that problem is the Antichrist. He comes along with a solution of, guess what? Redistributing the wealth. It's called the mark of the beast.
Isn't it amazing that we've seen glimpses of the white horse in the last 6-8 months? We've seen glimpses of the red horse with Persia, Battle of Gog and Magog, the red horse of war. We've seen this black horse of the economic destruction across the world, and now we're seeing the swine flu, the pale horse of disease and death. I mean, just all in 6 months' time, just boom, boom, boom. I feel like we live in apocalyptic times, Gary.
Well, James prophesied of this time, saying, "Woe, ye rich men, weep and howl." And this vast wealth of the global trading consortium is kind of shaking like a giant earthquake is about to strike. And we have looming war, famine, and disease. And, you know, J.R., in the tribulation period, the economy is going to run out of control. There will be unequal distribution of goods. Some people will be starving. Other people will be eating high. Yeah. But, hey, the man, the son of perdition is going to come along with a system to redistribute the wealth. Yeah, don't worry about it.
The mark of the beast. Well, let's move to the kingdom itself. I really like what you had to say from Isaiah chapter 21. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, in Isaiah 65:21, it says, "And they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit, and they shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands." In other words, you get to live in your own house and enjoy the fruit of your own labors.
That's capitalism.
It's capitalism.
And it says you don't build and another inhabit. That's socialism.
That's correct.
In other words, in the kingdom, capitalism will be king. Well, this is J.R. Church and Gary Sherman. Until next time, keep looking up.